Hello, this is again the Thai TV from Poland. I'm Monika Chojecka, and together with me is Mr. Stephen Yates, a former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, an advisor to Donald Trump's transition team, and also an expert on China and Taiwan. It's a privilege to have you in our Polish TV. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And let's start from the Polish-American cooperation. A few days ago, Polish Minister of Interior and Administration Mariusz Kamiński said that using Chinese companies in building 5G net is a terrible risk and horrible irresponsibility. But as far as we know, the decision of Polish government about 5G net has not been made yet. And what do you think about taking Huawei for building 5G net? And what do you think about this thought of Polish Minister Mariusz Kamiński?
Well, I think the warning is well taken. And I do hope that more European countries, especially those that share our values more deeply than others, perhaps, will align with the United States in expressing concern about the security of supply chains when it comes to technology our governments rely upon and our national telecommunications infrastructures rely upon. There's a lot of, I think, hype about 5G. And of course, the Chinese are very, very far ahead. And we in the United States and a lot of our allies around the world have enabled them to get far ahead on this. But I think 2019 has been a significant year of awakening about the true nature of the Communist Party of China, about the hostile means they use these technologies against their own people, whether it's the Muslim Uyghurs in their far west, or in the way they combined technology and surveillance to go after the demonstrators in Hong Kong. We know that they're not necessarily of the same view of these technologies being liberating and tools of freedom. They see these as tools of monitoring and control. And that should give any free people in Europe or anywhere in the world pause about allowing a major Chinese Communist Party controlled company like Huawei to be the major basis of this technological communications infrastructure in your own country.
And focusing on Polish-American friendship, we can say that the president of Donald Trump has created great possibilities for strengthening Polish-American cooperation and friendship. And how do you think, how important is the Chinese factor in this alliance might be? We know that Poland is in the One Belt, One Road initiative, and we are, considering 5G net Huawei, and could be a good ally, Poland like this, to the United States.
Well, I think there's two levels that U.S.-Polish relations are growing and are strong. One is the long-term strategic one, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's also a political one. In American politics, there are key parts of the United States where there is a larger number and influence of Polish Americans. And a lot of those states are in the battlegrounds that Donald Trump won and changed the electoral college majority in his favor. In many of those areas, whether they be in places where my family comes from in Wisconsin or Michigan or Illinois, over into Ohio and Western Pennsylvania, a lot of those areas are also very labor-oriented communities. And those labor voters have long been concerned about the role of China in hollowing out our manufacturing base and engaging in unfair trade practices. And so President Trump, when he was a candidate, built his political coalition around these issues that were very, very relevant to these areas of concentrated Polish-American communities. And so that political basis of relationship, I think, is quite positive for the strategic bilateral relationship between our countries, too. On the strategic side of things, I think a lot of Americans maybe don't follow the developments in Poland currently, but for a lot of Americans, they will never forget the role of solidarity, the role of Pope John Paul II, the role of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in standing up against the Soviet Union and the evil empire of that time. And the very, very compelling message of that moment was that you are not alone. You in Poland are not alone. You had the Pope, you had the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of England, all working together with a labor movement to try to promote a turn towards freedom, not just in Poland, but in turning the tide around the world. So a lot of Americans still think of Poland in this way. I think it's a very noble legacy. And I hope in today's current circumstances, when it comes to the challenges that come from Russia, but also the greater challenge, I think, to the world that comes from China, we Americans want to believe that the Polish people will still stand on the shoulders of that legacy and help us together beat another second evil empire in this century.
Oh, you mentioned evil empire. I want to ask you about this kind of thought. It came to me because we promote the excellent book of General Robert Spalding, The Stealth War, and I agree that the military, economic, financial methods in stopping communist China explodes on the earth, it's very important, but as you mentioned, Ronald Reagan, when he was fighting with the Russian Soviet evil empire, he was praying to God for help, and he announced that Russia is an evil empire on the summit of the evangelicals and pastors, and it was all connected to God. And what do you think if God could help America and the free world to stop the stealth war of communist China?
Well, I do believe very, very much that the Communist Party of China is the greatest attack on Chinese civilization and has created the greatest number of casualties among the Chinese people of any force in human history. But it's bigger than that. And this is why I think it is, in fact, an evil empire. And we need to distinguish between the Chinese people, who I think are our friends, and we hope they will enjoy the freedoms we have and will be able to pursue their faith and their freedom in their own way at some point. But the Communist Party is what stands in their way. In the first Cold War, we had a physical wall, and President Reagan boldly declared to tear down this wall. And that wall famously was keeping oppressed people in, not keeping the free people from trying to get there. It was trying to keep the unfree people from getting out. And in the new Cold War and new evil empire of the Communist Party of China, they have a great firewall of China that should be a tool of freedom, bringing internet to people, information, tools that help economic growth and help our intellectual horizons grow. But the Communist Party uses these tools to control, to keep their people in. The Communist Party has also attacked fundamental institutions of Chinese society that go back thousands of years, institutions of religion, institution of family, even the fundamentals of their language. All have been changed and controlled by the Communist Party of China. When I first started studying Chinese, one of the hardest things for an American to try to understand in Chinese were all the different words that they had for aunts, uncles, cousins. There was a different word for a cousin that was older on your father's side or a cousin that was younger on your mother's side. And there was like a dozen different ways of saying this. Well, now Chinese people don't need to know those words because they literally don't know what a cousin is. Because after 2 decades of a one-child policy, those concepts are completely gone. So everything from the structure of the family to churches that have to put themselves underneath the party instead of directly under God. The Chinese Communist Party, I think, has done great evil to the Chinese people. And as it seeks to export this model of development, relying on their technology, etc., it is, I think, seeking to export that destruction of humanity. And so I think it's actually more stark than a lot of people want to say. And that's why I think it's urgent for us to help the Chinese people to find their own way, to find their own freedom. We're not against China, the historical entity, but we are against this evil empire of the Communist Party ruling China and trying to undermine us.
Yes, and we have this Chinese expansion, communist expansion in Poland already, because there was anniversary, 70th anniversary in Warsaw of declaring communist China, and some of our journalists was beaten by Chinese from embassy in Warsaw. I want to ask you, what could Poles do to stop this Chinese communist expansion on Polish soil?
Well, number one, I think that we have to have a degree of self-respect. We should have pride in our own countries and cultures. It doesn't mean we have to be disrespectful of visitors. We welcome visitors. But just as if you or I were invited into someone else's home or country, it doesn't mean we change who we are as Americans or Poles, but we would respect our hosts in some ways in terms of not trying to undermine their fundamental way of life by just simply visiting their country. And the difference now, I think, is that these Chinese nationalists, Xi Jinping has unleashed a new form of ethnic nationalism where these Chinese visitors see themselves first and foremost as loyal to a party that is equal to the Chinese nation in their mind. And they seek to basically impose their way and their will wherever they go. Whether they go to an American university and try to tell people what kinds of activities or seminars they can have, or whether they go to Canada and try to tell them what kind of a student can be elected to student government, or whether they go to Poland and try to tell you how you can or cannot observe or protest their Communist Party anniversary. But there's nothing in Polish history that should lead anyone to want to celebrate the establishment of the Communist Party of China's rule over the Chinese people. And so this trying to fan their nationalist fervor all over the planet, from Australia to Poland to Canada and the United States, it's really something that's quite different than what previous Chinese leaders have done. But I think it's important for the Polish people to stand in solidarity with those who seek freedom. Again, I have great reverence for the legacy of the people who fought for freedom in Poland and the example they set to the rest of us in the entire world. It would be a shame to forget that legacy. That legacy is what the Polish people should be telling their Chinese visitors about, and say, out of love, we hope the Chinese people will have their own movement in this regard.
And regarding Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, one of the principles of Donald Trump's policy, Trump is America first, or nationalism. It is a response to globalism. A big proponent of globalists is now Xi Jinping. And many in Europe, for example, on summit in Davos, praised Xi for his approach to globalism, and criticized Trump for nationalism and isolationism. And it seems like in Europe the word nationalism is a very bad word, and make your country great again is a bad idea. And while making the planet great again, it's a great idea, like French President Macron put it. And what is wrong with Europe for American point of view? Can you tell us?
Well, I look at Europe in kind of two ways. There's a part of Europe that I have a great deal of respect for, and it goes back to that legacy we talked about in the Cold War. And I'm grateful for all of the sacrifice and struggle of European allies and the great people that have stood up for freedom and helped turn the direction the world went. But there is this other part of Europe that former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld referred to as old Europe. And it's really what I refer to as postmodern Europe, where they think that borders and countries don't matter, and that a lot of our traditional values don't matter, and that somehow we all have this common cause. And it's a dream. It's a dream that is not real, in my view, but it also is wrong for the people that those governments are meant to be responsive to. There are good forms of nationalism and bad forms of nationalism, just like there are good forms of behavior and bad forms of behavior for an individual. And so we have many people on the left that very simplistically try to say, well, nationalism, that equates to Nazism or some other kind of evil of the past. I think that's just very simplistic hogwash. It's just not true. It is important for us to have respect for our families, for our communities, for our countries, for our allies. Those are healthy things to have respect. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. And after all, it's our responsibility to take care of those things first. President Trump, I think, has been extremely effective in going to inner cities in the United States where they're overwhelmingly registered Democrat. They're not going to vote majority for a Republican candidate. But he will go into those communities and say, look, our economy is doing much, much better because we have better trade policies now that respect our workers more. Our manufacturing is growing, and it's putting our national interests first. And I, President Trump, and my party want to invest in African American jobs in our cities, Hispanic American jobs in our cities, for those who are citizens here and who have come here legally. While the other side wants to take your money and invest in international climate agreements and investments in global institutions overseas. And it becomes a very clear choice. It's not isolationist. President Trump is engaging in dealings all around the world. He moved our embassy to Jerusalem in Israel. After decades of promises, he did that. That's engaging in diplomacy with our ally Israel. He has been deeply engaged in trying to renegotiate or set the terms for a different relationship with Iran, something that previous presidents have failed to do. He has been going out of his way to rebalance economic relations with China and deal with that strategic problem in a whole different way. This is profound engagement in the world. It's just not the engagement the globalist left wants, because the globalist left wants that engagement to leave us without national identities, without borders, without churches, and without the traditional values that have made our civilization strong.
Yeah, that's what China, Communist China, is doing, is trying to do in Hong Kong. Let's talk more about Hong Kong, because President Trump has signed 2 bills supporting the Hong Kong protesters into law. And what do you think Beijing do next after this Trump step? Do you think that the second Tiananmen could still take place in Hong Kong?
I worry that could happen, and I obviously don't want that to happen. I see the leadership in China as somewhat stuck and has painted itself into a corner. This is of their own making. They are the ones that took very rigid views and tried to impose their political will on the free people of Hong Kong. Most of my life I've come and gone to Hong Kong, and the people there have always been told to me to be a people that focus on economic development, very pragmatic and practical. And of course, in 1997, they were a part of their sovereignty being changed from the United Kingdom to the People's Republic of China. So they're already accepting the fact that they are a part of the People's Republic of China. But recent pressures by Beijing and the incompetent government that is in charge of the Special Administrative Region of Hong Kong has done something that I never thought could happen. It brought 2 million out of 7 million people from Hong Kong out into the streets for 6 months to demand preservation of their freedoms, but also that the promises made to them be kept. It's a very simple and clear proposition. I admire their courage. It is unbelievable to me to see the endurance that they have had in keeping focus on what their 5 demands are. But Beijing has very, very bad options. Number one, the Great Firewall of China is strong, but it's not perfect. People in China are going to see that the Chinese people in Hong Kong are successfully sustaining this resistance. And there are people in China that would like to have their rights recognized and their freedoms and opportunities expanded. And they're also beginning to doubt how the propaganda machine of the People's Republic could have been so wrong for so long about where things are going in Hong Kong. But the most frightening thing of all for them, that would be devastating if all the people of China began to understand it more deeply, was the district level elections that just took place in Hong Kong, where 80% of those who voted supported the pan-democratic movement. And it was an overwhelming rejection of the agenda that Beijing had been trying to impose on the people of Hong Kong. And so, to me, there's no more talk of a silent majority in Hong Kong that supports the government or is sympathetic to Beijing and just wants to go back to business. Now we have direct democratic evidence that the people of Hong Kong are serious. And I hope they, like the Polish people of the past and like others that have been under the umbrella of oppression, that they won't stand alone. And that's why I think it's absolutely important for those who have had similar experience to stand with these people as they peacefully resist and struggle for their own long-term freedom.
And we also admire Hong Kongers and support them. We co-organize the rally in Poland on 8th of December in Warsaw, supporting protesters in Hong Kong. But there are people, politicians, journalists in Poland who still claim that Hong Kong is not our, case, and why should we care about what is going on in Hong Kong? Why would we support Hong Kongers? And how would you reply to these people?
Well, number one, it's true that Hong Kong is a faraway place, and it is possible to turn the other cheek and ignore their struggle. But I would just say, from just a practical and a theological point of view, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do you want to be that faraway place again one day in the future and have people in other parts of the world say, well, why would we care about Poland? Why would we care about the difficult neighborhood it lives in? We can go about our own lives. We don't have that big of an economic relationship with Poland in our country. There are many countries that could say this. And so I think that we have an obligation at some level, not necessarily to send troops, but at the very least to tell the truth, to express solidarity with those people, to try to push as many messages as possible into China that undermine the Great Firewall of China and undermine their claim that there's somehow a peaceful rise and a new model of development that should be attractive to the world. This is an evil model, and it's one that I think is failing the Chinese people. And Hong Kong right now is an international financial center and is an international media center, and we can see it with our own eyes. I just think it's very, very important we not turn away, or one day people will turn away from us.
You're an expert on Taiwan also, and I want to ask about Taiwan because what is happening in Hong Kong has a huge impact on Taiwan, and there will be a presidential and parliamentary elections soon. And do you think that what communist China is doing in Hong Kong is increases support for the Taiwan who advocate closer friendship with the United States? And are concerned about expansion of China in Taiwan?
Well, I do think the situation in Hong Kong has had a major impact on the environment in which the Taiwan election is being held. On January 11th, the 23 million people of Taiwan, their registered voters, will go to the polls, and they will, I believe, re-elect President Tsai Ing-wen to a second term. President Tsai Ing-wen is of the Democratic Progressive Party. It traditionally is more pro-independence. It recognizes an identity of the Taiwanese people that is not tied to the Communist Party of China. And I do think that the demonstrations of Hong Kong, the courage that those people, young and old and of many different walks of life, have shown, really sparked a flame in the Taiwan political system, where just a year ago there was a lot of pessimism, a lot of debates about balancing between the United States and China, the effectiveness of the Tsai administration. And I think now we see that making some kind of a deal with China is just not sustainable. If China is going to dishonor an agreement that's an international treaty registered with the United Nations between the United Kingdom and the People's Republic of China, if they're going to ignore an international treaty and their own basic law with regard to Hong Kong, well, then the kind of a peace deal that the Nationalist Party or Kuomintang has been talking about internally in recent years is completely out of the question. And so the opposition to President Tsai is the Nationalist Party. They have a nominee named Han Kuo-yu, who was swept to a mayorship in the southern port city of Kaohsiung just a year ago. But this key tenet of making business with China or pursuing some kind of a peace deal, I think has completely undermined what the Nationalist Party's position has been with Taiwan's relationship with China in such a significant way. I do hope it rallies more people in Taiwan to pursue deeper and broader friendship with the United States, but also with American-friendly allies in other parts of the world. I hope it would get them to think about new ways to deepen partnership with Poland. I hope it opens up their eyes to pursuing deeper partnerships with key states within the United States that have a strong base of support and trade with Taiwan. So I do hope that there is some positive that comes out of this. But there is no question that Xi Jinping has, I think, behaved in such a way that is perceived as threatening and belligerent that the counter response in Taiwan has been quite strong in reaffirming their own separate identity and their leaning toward friendship with the United States, Japan, and other allies.
I hope that what is going on in Hong Kong, it will be a warning for Poland, for example, about the consequences about cooperation with Communist China and about the expansion of Communist China. Thank you so much for being with us. We have amazing guest, Mr. Stephen Yates, a former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney and an advisor to Donald Trump, the team transition, and an expert on China and Taiwan. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, Hannah Shen and Kornelia Chojecka, for helping in this interview. I hope it won't be the last our talk, and I hope someday we can meet, not online, but live.
I welcome the chance to come to Poland and say hello.
Okay, I welcome you to Poland, and thank you so much. It was Stephen Yates, and it was Against the Tide TV, Eunika Chojecka. See you soon.